So welcome to this first Glencairn conversation of 2025, and I'm delighted to welcome to the residence tonight my friend Dr. Caroline Campbell, who's Director of the National Gallery of Ireland. And we're here tonight because Caroline is very kindly going to talk to our guests about a very special exhibition coming to Dublin, or already in Dublin this month. And this is not just, well, it's a sort of a variation on the annual traditional exhibition of Turner watercolours that a lot of people enjoy every January in the National Gallery, Caroline. This year it's a bit of a Scottish flavour, so could you tell us a bit about it?
It certainly is, and it's a pleasure to be here with you, Paul, to talk about Turner and other things. So every January there's this wonderful event which takes place in the cities of Edinburgh and of Dublin, when a group of watercolours by Turner, one of the greatest European and British artists of the 18th and 19th century, is exhibited only during this dark month of the year. And I remember being taken to see the Turners in Dublin when I was reasonably young, and what an impression it made on me. And it's really lovely to have this moment of celebration at this time of the year. So the Turners that are in both our collections came to us from the same individual, Henry Vaughan, who was the son of, I think, a hat manufacturer in Southwark in southeast London. And he was very, very rich because of his father's trade. And he used that to collect art. He collected old master drawings, and he collected really wonderful contemporary art, so work made in the 19th century. And at the heart of that was a collection of very representative watercolours by Turner, who is really a magician with colour. And that comes across in his paintings, but even more, I would argue, in the works he makes on paper, which are often really sensitive and extraordinary responses to light and to atmosphere. And Vaughan in 1900, when he died, I can imagine the two directors in Edinburgh and in Dublin being astonished one day to receive this note saying they were each going to receive over 30 of these great works for Turners for their collections. And the deal of Vaughan's gift was that they were kept together. They were called the Vaughan Bequest. They could only be exhibited in the month of January, and they could only be shown as part of the Vaughan Bequest. Very cleverly, our lawyers worked out a few years ago in between Edinburgh and Dublin that although we can't lend from the Vaughan Bequest, we can swap within the Vaughan Bequest. And we thought it would be remarkable to do that this year, 2025, because this is the 250th anniversary of Turner's birth.
And Turner was in so many ways almost a sort of revolutionary painter, wasn't he? I always think both the oils and the watercolours, people know the Fighting Temeraire, but
Indeed.
we've got some watercolours here, and I think in the Vaughan Bequest they're only to be shown in January, and they're to be shown with sort of without natural light in very sort of protected conditions. But you've chosen for your talk tonight some wonderful sort of paintings encompassing Scotland and England, and I think Switzerland and Italy and Venice. And what do you think marked Turner out as almost a sort of a sort of breakthrough artist in the tradition of painting, particularly landscape painting?
I think Turner's really interesting because, like many great artists, he is both a traditionalist and he is an innovator. He is totally imbued with the art of the past. One of the artists he most particularly admired was a 17th century French painter called Claude Lorrain. And in fact, when Claude lived for a lot of his life in Italy, and Turner paints sometimes Scotland or England or Germany as if it looks through one of Claude's landscapes. But he was also an artist who was always thinking about what he saw around him. He was particularly, I think, sensitive to sensation, to changes in weather and to climate. And like many of the romantic writers and poets of his lifetime, from William Wordsworth, indeed to Walter Scott, who was a personal friend, he thinks he changes his work a lot according to particular conditions. I think what's remarkable about Turner is how he responds to the rain, to the wind, or even to something industrial. Like one of my favourite paintings by him is Rail, Steam and Speed,
Yes,
a
which
great
was here
picture.
in the Sun is God exhibition, wasn't it, a couple of years ago?
Sadly,
And
it wasn't. But
oh, right, I remember the picture. But it's a sort of big. It's like a sort of steam train going through a sort of a mountain pass or something.
It's a steam train going round the rather prosaic town of Maidenhead
right.
in the southeast of
Right.
England. But there is a
But
hare.
he makes this great drama out
He
of
makes
it.
this dramatic. And remember, trains were very new in
Yes.
the 1830s and 40s. And he makes it not just dramatic about industry, but also about nature. If you look very carefully, there's a little hare
Right.
just running before the train. Turner was a great revolutionary and a great inspiration also to many subsequent artists. I think particularly of the French Impressionist painters,
Right.
Monet and Pissarro, who came to London, where they saw Turner's work in the National Gallery in 1870 when they were fleeing from the Franco-Prussian War.
Right.
And he's an artist who painters, artists, writers continue to respond to today. He's very much of his time, and he's also very much of ours.
And that leads me on to sort of talking about national galleries, because in a way they're sort of telling the story of a country through its art. I remember the quote that Kenneth Clark used to open Civilization when he talked about Ruskin and nations telling their story in sort of words and in deeds, but also in art, and saying that art in a way was the most sort of trustworthy, I think. And you have this responsibility, I guess, as a director of the National Gallery, and for many years before in the National Gallery in London, in devising the collections and the exhibitions and exhibiting the treasures. You're telling us about ourselves in a way. How do you interpret that sort of that responsibility of curating the nation's art collection?
Well, it's an extraordinary honour to be entrusted with looking after the nation's art collections and to be enabling people to look at them and to enjoy them, which is fundamentally the reason they're there. I think national galleries are very interesting concepts because the National Gallery of London and the National Gallery of Dublin are, of course, places where you can see the great art of those countries, but they're also places where you can see the great art of other places too. National galleries have a role in society to make us think, to give us pleasure, but also for us to see what else there is in other places and in other times too. They can be a remarkable connector between the past and the present, and indeed between where we are and where others were and are too. And I think about that in terms of the responsibility.
And you've had a particular emphasis, I would say, on the role of women artists. You had an exhibition last year on Lavinia Fontana, Rule Breaker. How do you, when you go about thinking about, and these collections must take many years to sort of plan these exhibitions, do you go in with specific themes in mind? Is it part of a sort of a longer term campaign, a personal philosophy that you bring to it?
Well, I think exhibitions are very important for museums because they are often an opportunity for you to really showcase things that are important about what museums and galleries do. And that's providing ways for people to make and find their own stories, to see things which are inspirational, sometimes sad, often very exciting, and to show what is new, what is new in the stories we tell, and also celebrate things that are really, really great. And I love the art of many periods and of many places, many men as well as women. I never want to stop looking at the paintings of Titian and Caravaggio, for instance, but I also think it's important to introduce new narratives. And always what's interesting when interrogating the past is with our contemporary lens, we always see different things. And artists like Lavinia Fontana or the great Irish painters Evie Hone and Mamie Jellett, who we'll celebrate in an exhibition this year, we're looking at them today in a way they might not have been considered in their lifetime, but they're an important part of the history of art as well as the present of art. And that's why I think it's important to be introducing new artists into the exhibition programs and also continuing to think in new ways about those artists we know and love, of whom Turner, of course, is definitely one.
And what, as a young person, sort of first attracted you to art history? I can tell you the answer for me, which is not a very honourable one. I was a terrible athlete at secondary school, And after 2 years of compulsory physical education, which was playing rugby on wet Scottish fields, in fact, not far from Melrose, one of the places where you
Yes.
have a Turner painting on show tonight, as it were, we got the opportunity to do art history as an excuse. So I swapped the cold mud of Murrayfield for Cézanne and the warmth of Provence. So what was your introduction to the world of art history growing up in Belfast?
Growing up in Belfast, I grew up in a family where people were very interested in art and very interested in literature. But actually, one of my most formative experiences was when my mum took me to Dublin when I was a teenager to buy the dress for my school formal, as we call it in the north. It would be a Debs event here in Dublin. And we started our day at the National Gallery and she took me to see her favourite pictures. And I never forgot that moment because she said, this is for you. You can come in and you can go here anytime you want. And throughout my career in museums, that has really been my philosophy. Museums are for everyone. They are not an ivory tower. And our responsibility is really to enable people to get a great deal out of that collection. I feel I've had a lifelong relationship with paintings in the National Gallery of Ireland, in the National Gallery of Scotland, where my brother was a student, and in the National Gallery of London, where I was a student and when I worked for many years. And I really want other people to feel the same way about these great places, repositories not just of pictures, but of emotions and of experiences.
Well, that's a lovely note on which to end. So you have until the end of January to get to see the fantastic Scottish side of the Vaughan Bequest, and then the home Gillett exhibition is opening in April, I think. And all through the year, the National Gallery has a treasure trove of paintings, British, Irish, European, and beyond. So Caroline Campbell, thank you so much for sharing your story and sharing the pictures with us tonight.
Thank you, Paul.